Welcome to Paulogia and another edition of Ham and Egg News. I'm pleased to be joined today by James DOWNARD, also known as RJ, a man who has forgotten more about anti-evolution factions, claims, and tactics than I can ever hope to know. His tip website has fast become a go-to resource for all my science videos, so in a way, you already know his work.
Hello, I'm James DOWNARD, creator of the Troubles in Paradise, the Methodology of Creationism project, where I try to apply source methods. Sounds boring, but it isn't. It's contact sport. It's what sources do you rely on to come to a conclusion, and how do you fact check them? And you'll find that people who have trouble with thinking things through well have really big problems with that fact-checking part, and they tend to rely on secondary sources.
My channel has been built on this source methodology all along. You guys are used to me popping up a web article and then immediately jumping to the scientific papers that it was based on. I just didn't know that method had a name.
I apply it specifically to the creation-evolution venue, and it's a universal toolkit that improves your own way of thinking, and I hope makes a more effective way of criticizing people who are believing things that aren't true.
RJ's work manifests itself in an amazing book, not so succinctly called Evolution Slam Dunk: Why the Reptile-Mammal Transition Proves Macroevolution and How Anti-Evolutionists Ignore It, which is an amazing resource on the too often ignored evidence of reptile to mammal evolution, as well as a recently started YouTube channel, and the centerpiece is his Trouble in Paradise document, a free resource covering nearly every conceivable anti-evolution topic that you don't even know you wanted to know. I use it often. Now, RJ has been doing all of his exhaustingly research-heavy work full-time for a few years, but since we secularists tend not to be as good as the theists in passing around the collection plate, those efforts can get strangled, and RJ is getting to the point where financial support is going to be needed for him to continue. As I've never before asked for money on my channel, let me break that tradition by asking you to consider sponsoring RJ for a few dollars, if that's something you can afford. I know it would go a long way to help him continue to fight the good fight. You can find all the details at his website, tortucan.wordpress.com, and tell him that Paul sent you. RJ, I honestly originally thought that this was some kind of Pirates of the Caribbean reference.
Tortuga.
But I've actually heard you referring to people as Tortucans from time to time. What's that all about?
Tortucan. It's a word I had to make up because there wasn't a word for it. That's why you make up words. I needed a term to describe somebody whose cognitive architecture is dominated by the ability to selectively not think about things they don't want to think about. This was a phenomenon I was seeing in spades in the creation-evolution affair. These are not stupid people, and yet when I'm looking at them from a source methods direction, I'm seeing example after example of not thinking about things they don't want to think about. They bring up subjects they don't think through, they don't work through what they think happened, they don't lay out criteria for changing their mind, they're not paying attention to most of the data, and they just go into deer in the headlight mode when you try to steer them onto subject matter that they don't want to think about. So, I thought of a turtle with a shell that's just impervious to evidence, but I didn't want to insult turtles.
I actually wrote a turtle. I saw a video where they said, you can grab the back of a turtle and ride it for a little bit. So I did it, and my wife's like, oh, what are you doing? Like, I saw a video and said I could do that.
Then on the fourth morning, he roped himself a couple of sea turtles, rushed them together, and made a raft.
He roped a couple of sea turtles.
Aye, sea turtles.
And so I found that the Latin for turtle, tortuga, was still open. It's cognate of that Tortuga, that island thing, and so it was basically not used. So I thought, why not call them Tortucans? And it's a qualified thing because it disconnects it from being a pejorative about the nature of your mind otherwise. To describe somebody as a Tortucan is saying nothing whatsoever about how bright they are. They can be very bright or stupid. It doesn't tell you whether they're religious or not, although they can be, or they can be atheists. It's not a regular sciencey term yet. But I think it relates to a lot of things that are, from cognitive dissonance to self-deception issues.
All right, well, let's see if we can find any Tortugans today.
Hi, and welcome. I didn't know who was starting. I was like, I'll go ahead and do it. Hi, and welcome to Answers News for June 8th. And Ken is out today.
He didn't realize that. On Monday, he's like, yeah, we'll see you on Thursday.
And I'm like, no. He's like, oh, have fun today. I said, we always have more fun without this. So. Just kidding.
Ken's not here to tell people about emojis.
Well, I'll tell people. All right, come on, people, emoji, so I don't get in trouble, and we don't get in trouble for that. So.
Facebook has added a feature where if you like their LGBTQ page, then you gain access to a Pride Rainbow emoji. I've been encouraging everyone to use the rainbow emoji to react to items on Ken Ham and Answers in Genesis pages. Because the rainbow represents the flood, right? I hear the AiG social media manager is quite frustrated with this phenomenon. Keep it up.
Pro-LGBT group plans protest at the Southern Baptist Convention in 2017. Wow.
Yeah, shocking.
And Faith in America hopes to persuade the nation's largest Protestant denomination to change its interpretation of Scripture.
Right off the bat, AiG launches into the nice traditional culture camp hysteria. LGBT stuff are not stuff they like. This is part of their conservative framework. This is kind of like duh. But the irony is, for the calls of wow and shocking that these liberals are attempting to have a new interpretation, not interpretation, of the Bible, misses the fact that, yes, there are texts in the Bible that frown upon apparently same-sex unions, although the thing is not explicitly discussed by Jesus. The same Bible explicitly tells you how you're supposed to treat your slave, and that you're not supposed to be divorced, and that you are not supposed to wear mixed fabrics, and that you shouldn't be eating shellfish. And there's a whole bunch of things that are discussed in that same absolutely perfect Bible that you're not supposed to interpret. But we do interpret. We figure out that owning people really isn't all that nice, and that we should stop doing it, even though Exodus 21 gives you explicit rules on it, and nowhere, anywhere in the Old or the New Testament does anybody ever say that it's not a good thing to own people under certain circumstances. The Southern Baptists in particular is ironic, because that denomination came into existence because they were objecting to the efforts by those nasty liberals from the North who thought that slavery was a bad thing and that they should stop doing it down south of the Mason-Dixon line.
All right, this next one comes from a blog called Naturalist Historia. It's the blog of Joel Duff. It was called "Was the Young Earth Perfect?" All right, I don't know how to pronounce that.
Prelapsarian.
There you go. Paradise, a maladapted world.
He really doesn't like young Earth.
No, he does not like young Earth, no.
He is an evolutionist. He believes in God, though.
He does, yes.
You know, so really what he does is he saes, when it comes to stuff like Genesis 1 to 11, throw it out, you can't trust that. Let's trust what the atheists say about origins. So he accepts the pagan account instead of the biblical account.
Bullpucky. The data exists. It's not religious or not. It's not atheist or not. Sedgwick back in the 19th century was just as devout as Duff was. The problem is the physical forensic evidence, which Hodge and AiG in general pays virtually no attention to, still exists. The data points exist. So please don't try to put this off as an atheism, paganism issue, because that's not the facts. The fact is interbedded volcanic ash and all of the other things physically exist in the fossil record. The geological details exist independent of your narrow-minded opinion of them. This is not a religious issue. This really makes my blood boil, and it's also insulting to the forensic care and meticulous work done by actual geology area. The irony, of course, is that Duff's piece is not about the geology. It's about the creationist worldview and what creationists think about the problem, or rather, what they don't think about the problem.
In fact, that's a very common question, so much so that we actually answer that question in the New Answers Book, Volume 1. And what's interesting is reading this blog, I can tell that he has not read that chapter. He's not looked up the research on that subject.
Well,
it's clever of Hodge to wave the New Answers book from 2007 as though this had answered the question.
Fun fact, it was this very book that caused me to leave young Earth creationism and eventually become an atheist.
The problem is the only chapter on the subject was done by Hodge and McIntosh, Andy McIntosh, creationist, that didn't in fact answer this question. So it wouldn't have mattered if Duff had or had not read that particular material. All they were offering was a theological defense for the existence of these forms in earlier bit. Not a single bit of evidence is ever presented in there that the pre-flood world contained the germs of these features that were going to lead on to something else.
Did bunny rabbits have eyes like in front of their, on the front of their face like this instead of at the side before the fall?
To look for predators.
And he says he has 4 solutions, which he doesn't believe any of them, but at least he lists
he
them.
considers them ad hoc solutions. Basically, they were used for a different purpose.
Same thing with like T-Rex. We say, oh gosh, it has these big 6-inch teeth, but maybe it used it to pierce through a watermelon or a coconut type, fruit that has a very hard outer shell.
There's a lot of animals with sharp teeth that don't eat meat, for example.
Right, yeah, even today.
The delight of Georgia Purdom bringing up tyrannosaur teeth to eat melons. I know this is a thing that's been knocking around since Dwayne Gish, but this is just flapdoodle. This is preposterous. And what's even worse, nobody in the creationism venue, not Ken Ham, not Georgia Purdom, not Bodie Hodge, has ever offered the slightest dynamic reason to think that the forensics of actual animal teeth, the wear patterns, the root formations, the growth patterns, all of the material with coprolites and diet, and all the other factors that allow you to understand how an animal's systems function in reality, that they can never offer any argument that a tyrannosaur or any predator of that type was a herbivorous eater of melons. This is just bullpucky. It is preposterously bad pseudoscience. This would have been bad pseudoscience in 1800. Baron Cuvier, who could tell you a lot about an animal and its behavior just from its teeth, and this is in a pre-evolutionary context because these things fit together in ways that are extremely detailed. And nobody, 0 people in the creationist community ever bothers to pay attention to that or make any forensic evidence to suggest that that's even slightly plausible. Again, we are now missing the point of Duff's article, which was about why you find eyeballs on the sides of the head of rabbits. This is an adaptation to predation. Was the original rabbit designed with that? Trying to argue that somehow or other it would have been okay for it to have a feature like that when no animal that is not being predated on has that configuration is evading the data. But then again, when do Purdom or Hodge pay attention to stuff? Am I supposed to pretend that the superficial, evasive, dated drivel that emanates from answers in Genesis is on a par with the detailed, meticulous, hard work of the scientists who actually do the work?
One of the things that it was totally neglected in all that was, and we mentioned this in the book, in Genesis chapter 3, things changed. When Adam and Eve sinned against God, God cursed the ground, he cursed the animal, sentenced man to die.
Yes, he mentioned in the book the issue of the fall and the like. What you didn't do is address the technical issue that either these pre-adaptation forms that are so specialized for predator and prey relationships existed pre-flood, or could have existed genetically in a pre-flood model and could have originated or developed post-flood in anything like the time required. We have measurements in actual animals, mutation rates, adaptation issues. What we have here is yet another example of how if you ignore 90 or 95% of the data, then you can cram it in, kinda, sorta, if you look at it in just the right way through the filtered, blacked-out glasses, to fit the theology. And announcing what you want as what you wrote about in the book doesn't make any of that data go away or make your ignorance of it any less profound.
And if you look at some of those curses and things that are going on, the serpent, if you remember, was cursed to crawl on its belly and eat dust all the days of its life. Most commentators think that serpent physically changed forms to be a lower position. Well, other animals were cursed at the same time. Is that when sharp teeth claws came about to help them survive in the same cursed and broken world? It's possible.
Oh, Bodie, can it happen? Is it possible? No, it isn't possible in your time frame. Here is the giant snag that you guys never seem to address, that there are identifiable genetic and biological components that have to change to get from A to B, and it can't happen fast enough. You can't get a pre-flood world to turn into the post-flood world without ever defining what the pre-flood world is supposed to look like for every single species or kind. Lay down what they are, what their DNA are, what their developmental gene systems are. You've got all of that data that has to get to where we know they are now because we can observe them in the real world physically now. And there ain't no way that you're going to be able to cram all of that into any short time frame. And nobody on your side, even somebody higher up on the pay grade than you are, the creationist geneticist Jeffrey Tompkins, even he hasn't been able to pull that off. Why? Because it's not possible.
He says, I'm hard pressed to find any description or speculation in their literature kind of about that. And I'm like, then you obviously don't read our, it just goes to show you don't read our stuff.
It's our most basic book.
Oh, Georgia. The common accusation that Duff and others are not reading your material. Well, I'm not inside of Duff's head, and to the extent that he doesn't cite your particular material, I don't know what he's read. But I do read your stuff. I read answers in Genesis Research Journal. I follow the material, and I do something which you guys don't seem to be very good at, which is source fact-checking. To look up the primary source material, to investigate whether or not it's being fairly represented or not, to find out whether or not information in that source is being misrepresented or ignored completely, or if relevant material that isn't in that source, but you would have to find elsewhere, are not being mentioned. I know in the case of the reptile-mammal transition and in a variety of areas that Answers in Genesis pseudo-scholarship is incompetent. It is evasive. It is manipulative. It is tendentious. It is purely driven by the tail wagging the dog, that there are doctrines which can never not be true, and you only pay attention to the little fiddly bit slices that can be made to appear to fit there. The more we read your stuff, the less convincing your arguments appear. The more we read the material, books come out, articles come out, which make assertions. The problem is at the genetic level, at the paleontology level, at the geology level, way before we get to the theology issues, the simple forensic facts don't fit your argument. You can't fit all the species into the framework. You can't fit all the genes into the network. You can't even explain why we got 10% of our genome composed of ALU pseudogenes, let alone whether or not little bunny rabbits had weird eyeballs, or whether or not homeobox genes existed in archaebacteria, any of the things which anti-evolutionists kind of sort of have to have happen in order for some of their arguments to make sense, and the data doesn't fit.
Yeah,
atheists or even theistic evolutionists, like Christians, but they believe in evolution millions of years because they think we're lying. They don't think we're telling the truth, so why would they bother even reading our stuff?
Well, they don't.
Georgia has a bit of a point here. There are indeed some critics of creationism who don't bother to read the creationist material and just go harumph and think it's all absolute twaddle. That is not a good methods approach to do, and that's not what I do. I know creationism is twaddle because I read creationists. thousands and thousands of creationist sources. You can throw that argument against some people, but you're not going to be able to throw it against me, because Troubles in Paradise Project is specifically focused on figuring out what source material is done. Not only do I read your stuff, but I know what you don't read because you don't cite it. So furthermore, I know that anti-evolutionists in general are missing 90% of the data set. I don't have to guess, I'm measuring. There's only a few thousand technical sources that have ever been cited in all of the anti-evolution material that I've managed to catalog so far, and that's against a data set of over 20,000 technical papers. So we're only getting about 10% of the data stream that's being bumped into, and when you look at specifically what's getting bumped into, it's a miserable misrepresentation of the source material. This is painfully obvious in the case of the reptile-mammal transition.
As detailed in RJ's book, available now on Amazon.
By all means, let's criticize creationism by reading creationists attentively, carefully, fairly, not relying on secondary sources. We leave the relying on secondary source stuff to you creationists, because you do it all the time. Every single one of the sources that you listed as links for this presentation today are all secondary sources, even when primary sources were available. So don't waive that, pay attention to the data, read the original material thing, at least around me, or anybody who adopts a source methods approach to analysis.
So this next one comes from Viz.org, and it says, evolution on the fast lane. One flounder species becomes two.
The speciating flounder and super fast speciation. This is clearly one that Ken Ham wanted on the table, because he actually tweeted on it online, and I caught that little bit.
So now, again, this is not evolution.
Speciation and
I
evolution.
know, it's a flounder and a flounder. But what it shows is that speciation can actually happen very, very fast. So that's why you can get all the different animal species in a few thousand years, because as it turns out, even in our modern day, we're observing speciation happening quickly.
But you'll notice once again, our little gang are getting a secondary account at phys.org rather than looking at the original paper. It's an interesting point, because speciation is one of the big problems with anti-evolutionism. That to simply dismiss it as, oh, it's just still a flounder, is missing the point. It's what are the dynamics of actual speciation. Speciation can take place fairly quickly in certain specialized cases. To get to macroevolution involves speciation processes by necessity, but it involves more time than that. And this is one of the disastrous problems that you get into with flood geology, because they're simultaneously trying to argue speciation is really, really trivial, like this, or it can happen so fast that it can transform a small number of kinds into millions of species in just the time since the flood. You can't get that quick of a genetic variation. It's utterly implausible. It's not supported by the information that we actually have. Nobody in the anti-evolution movement, young earth creationists or intelligent designers, ever bother to look at that primary source data and to think through how they're going to apply that to their own model, because they don't have a model. They only have a wish of what they don't want to be true. Macroevolution.
DNA from ancient Egyptian mummies reveals their ancestry. So this is really cool.
The Egyptian mummy case. No, it's not a new thriller to appear in 3D. It's our Hodge and Purdom misrepresenting source material, because once again, they're relying on a secondary source that isn't necessarily telling you all the skivvy.
And the study couldn't determine the origin of the Egyptians. So where did the ancient Egyptians come from? And what does the Bible say?
Well, if you go back to the Bible, the word for Egypt in the Old Testament is the Hebrew name Mitzrayim. It looks like Mizraim, but it's Mitzrayim. That's one of Noah's grandsons.
First problem is, although the Washington Post article is saying, oh, gee, we don't know quite where the Egyptians came from, this doesn't mean that all bets are off. Nobody in the genetics community is under the impression that the Egyptians could be just from anywhere. They could be like from New Zealand, or like from Eden, which according to the Book of Mormon is in Missouri. It's which branches in Africa are contributing most to the Egyptian origin. For that, you need more data points. But it doesn't mean we don't have data points, or that the article didn't mention them. Most notably, that the region where these people were coming from had a settlement range that goes back for 3000 BC, which is way before the supposed magical flood, and getting perilously close to the creation of the universe, according to Hodge and Purdom's young earth creationism. There's another serious problem. Absolutely nothing in that data stream, nor in anything done by any full-blown geneticists, gives the slightest impression that the Egyptian population suffered a bottleneck only 4,500 years ago, where every single one of them would have to have been descended from 8 people on Noah. Plus, 1,000 years is not exactly enough to repopulate the planet, and it's not just Egypt. They got to account for China. They've got to account for all of the Americas. They've got to account for the Australian Aborigines, which in that normal science go back 40, 50, 60,000 years. They were coming there by boat long before Noah, his crowd, ever appeared.
If you ask Egyptians, they'll say that they have become more European recently, and we see exactly the opposite. That's interesting.
Yeah, what you think and what DNA shows a lot of times is very different. Right.
Yes, Georgia, what you think and what the DNA actually are really different. And one of the myths that gets blown to smithereens by the actual data set are the notion that the Egyptians are somehow descended from one of the sons of Noah.
All right, the next one is from The Independent in the UK. Great Barrier Reef can no longer be saved. Australian experts concede. Once again, what's the reason? Global warming.
Global warming, climate change. Oh no, all this stuff is fine.
I was like, okay, why are they saying this? And they kept saying, well, we need to maintain it because of its ecological function. So I kept thinking, okay, what's its ecological function? And I read through the whole article and I have no clue what its ecological function is. I don't think they know.
Gosh, Georgia and Bodie show us exactly how clever they are in not liking global warming. In the same way that they paid attention to the primary source data on everything else that they presented so far, here they're riffing off of a secondary article, which is talking in general terms about threats to the barrier reef that are related to climate change. Did it occur to you to do some research? Did it occur to you to investigate what ecological connections are, how ocean salinity, how CO2 levels, all of that relate to that? Are you going to be ignorant and not investigate because your secondary source passed on to you didn't go into it in enough technical detail in an article that's not in a technical journal?
Yeah. So it's kind of hard to make a case for we need to maintain it if you don't even know why we need to maintain it, other than it's beautiful and it's a tourism site.
And I can guarantee you that the people at AiG aren't going to get any closer to that than they are to how to figure out how a tyrannosaur doesn't eat melons. What we get into is you have people in the current administration now who think no better about these subjects than Georgia and Bodie do. Except now they're the Secretary of Energy or the Environmental Protection Agency or some of the other areas like being the Vice President. And they are going to apply exactly the same conclusion first, evidence only where convenient and only if it fits the conclusion that we want to be true. That's going to make an effect on people's lives. We have now moved from, oh gosh, creationists are silly people who believe in Noah's Ark, to things that are affecting the lives of real people. There are people living on islands in the Pacific Ocean who are terrified at losing their home because even a slight amount of sea level rise is going to mean they're underwater because they're at sea level. This is not trivial. This are real people's lives at stake. And now it moves from being, ha-ha, yuck, yuck, how silly answers in Genesis are, to this are the consequences of a methodology that is inherently flawed and dangerous to apply to the real world because they will arrive at ridiculous and dangerously bad conclusions. That's not a thing to laugh at.
And what they do, they actually look at some of the shallow areas, where, once the coral grows so high, it's in shallow area, it doesn't want to grow anymore.
I can't resist calling attention to the fact that the first major scientist to figure out how coral atolls form, how they are stratified based on the water temperature and that range, and it constrains their growth structure, was, drumroll, Charles Darwin. Using the geology, that new geology that the Answers in Genesis bunch can't stand, new geology of the 1830s, and that this is the standard, absolutely observable reason why there are atolls in certain places and not in others and why they look the way they do.
We're getting a lot of emojis.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, people like the Great Barrier Reef.
Some angry faces, so I never know how to take those.
Yeah.
Oh, gee, they're getting emojis on the Barrier Reef thing. Wow. Do you think we could move beyond emoji to actual thought, to paying attention to the people who are doing the work? There are scientists laboring hard and carefully to make sense out of this. I'm afraid all we're going to get are little glib emojis. Wow. This is showing where ideas have consequences.
The next one is from Sputnik News. Yeah, Sputnik News. Ancient knowledge, early humans in Peru more advanced than we thought. Well, than they thought.
But what really got me in this particular article were the dates.
Wow.
The dates are so far off, it's not even funny. And this is the problem with radiometric dating methods.
Right.
People they do not question a date when it's published.
Outside of the young Earth camp, the rest of the world finds radiometric dating to be a reasonably reliable method with general awareness of precision and margin of error. It's like accepting distances from a map or measurements of temperature. You're like someone watching the weather and screaming, "No one's questioning the thermometer!" No, it's generally reliable, so no one's questioning it until adequate reason is given. For the rest of us, it's a tool.
Yeah.
These guys were sharp, they were smart, and that's what we expect from intelligent people leaving Babel and ultimately making their way to some of these places. The problem is the dates.
This is yet another example. It's going to need to be a pattern here, isn't it? Of these creationists relying on very slim secondary sources, in this case Sputnik News, which tells us about advanced Peruvians. Unfortunately, there's a paper. It's in Science Advances, mouse click, free. Delahaye's Simple Technologies and Diverse Food Strategies of the Late Pleistocene. It apparently is not quite so advancey as they would have liked to have seen. You have people coming into the New World. The oldest dates are about 15,000 years ago, and remember, that's what Hodge and company don't like, that radiocarbon thing pushing it back before the beginning of the universe. Pre-Columbian history is a fascinating area. It's wonderful as they're trying to figure out how many waves of people came to America, but we've got the haplotypes. We can delineate the waves of migration, some of which are involving ships and others, but they're not Noah, and they're not pre-Noah. And so there's a large data set here of paleogeography that is never going to make any sense. And if the closest they can get to it in creationism land is a Sputnik piece from the old Soviet Union, where we have now new Putin land, where we get all sorts of superstitious drivel, no, I'm afraid the real science paper was just a mouse click away, and you could have learned about it. Sorry. Even without the radiometric dating, the data stream itself, regardless of how you date it, can't be crammed into a flood model where everything you're seeing in the New World, the culture, the quipu's, the style of where they're building things, the kind of architectural detail, the pottery styles, everything about their culture is homegrown. It's not carried from Noah, from Ararat. And nobody, zip, zero, nada, creationists make any attempt to account for the details of the New World.
This next one comes from the New York Times, challenging mainstream thought about beauty's big hand in evolution. So this is a problem that evolution always has. How do you explain beauty? Because it doesn't seem to have any kind of survival value.
2 words, sexual selection. It's not really survival of the fittest, it's survival of the genes that have sex.
Yeah, okay, so let me get this straight. We're talking about beasts and we're talking about beauty. Mm-hmm. Beauty and the beast, huh?
Bodie, don't you remember? There's a gay character in Beauty and the Beast now.
Belle can be as argumentative as she is beautiful.
Exactly. Who needs her when you've got us?
Yes.
So you're not supposed to talk about it.
Well, there's no one as easy to bolster as you. Too much?
Yep.
This next one comes from Fox News. Scientists may have found evidence of a parallel universe. Okay, so you start reading through it, and then it says there's a slim possibility. Okay, that's a lot of difference for may have found evidence to slim possibility.
If it's running into our universe, then it would be physical, and we're running into the same universe. It's all part of one universe.
The only time this happens is on Doctor Who. Okay, that's the only time that works and happens.
No, you have your sci-fi wrong again. But it does happen reasonably often on Star Trek.
I don't understand what's so special about this region of space.
Picture it this way, Mr. Chekhov. We exist in a universe which coexists with a multitude of others in the same physical space. At certain brief periods of time, an area of their space overlaps an area of ours.
But obviously from the music, we can affirm that such happenings are evil.
We don't even have any evidence of what it would be like if we did run into one.
Right.
So
we wouldn't even know what to look at.
It just goes to show that they're being 100% arbitrary. It's totally irrelevant.
Yeah, totally.
They're just throwing stuff out there.
Hodge is just plain wrong when he says, oh, this is pure speculation, except he's relying on what? The fabulous world of Fox News for their science? The Great Science Journal? Does it occur to him that relying on a tertiary source is dangerous because Fox News wasn't even citing the original paper directly, it was relying on a phys.org summary of it? The thing is that cold spots in space, or some of the other little ripples in gravitational theory, or other phenomenon, can in fact be caused by intersecting multidimensional universes. Membrane theory, or brain theory for short, has been dealing with that for quite some time. Georgia Purdom had advised us we're supposed to pay attention to what creationists actually say, not secondary, not relying on external things, read what we say. And in every single case, she and Hodge have failed to actually look up what the scientists were actually saying in papers they had access to by nothing more complicated than a mouse click. I know this because I mouse clicked. I'm afraid you got to practice what you preach. Don't tell us what we're supposed to be paying attention to when you don't do the same thing.
The Washington Post. Why don't conservative Christians worry about climate change? God.
You talk to astronomers, people who studied the climate. You get some of these guys together. We have a global warming DVD that goes through this.
What a relief. With Ken gone, you've plugged only the Answers book and Tower of the Babel book so far. Gotta pay the bills.
They kind of try to say that Christians say that, well, God's going to intervene. God's not going to allow these bad things to happen. Now, I've never thought that, and I've certainly never heard other Christians really promote that view. Like, God's going to step in with some big miracle and cool the earth off if it gets too hot. And it's more that, we do know how the world will end. It will not be because of something man did, but it will be the most extreme climate change ever. Because God's going to burn it up with fire.
That's right.
I'd agree. The prevailing Christian attitude is that since the Bible doesn't say climate change disaster, any such predictions are obviously overblown and false. So why do anything?
But you know what? I mean, God is in charge.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just need to step back and go, be still, and know that God is God.
See? Just do nothing. Though it's a pity that the same Christians actively try to prevent anyone else from doing anything.
And there's a whole big climate change debate going on
Oh,
in all
is
the
there?
comments. I'm watching it a little bit.
All right,
Go
so
ahead
we
and
know that
discuss
before.
it amongst yourself.
Oh, we will. Leaving rainbow emojis.
So we're going to be signing off for today, and we'll see you next. Ken will be here next week. So
We'll see you after that.
See ya.
All right. That was a long one, but a good one. Thanks, RJ.
I hope I've spurred you on to investigate more. Although scholarship is a contact sport, I think it's a fulfilling one. It always improves your own thinking. It's always honing your own precision. And it really reveals why people who believe things that aren't true manage to do that. They don't play that game very well. In fact, they don't really play it at all. So our playing it means that it's forcing them onto turf they can't possibly defend. I think that's kind of a good thing to do.
I agree. And if you viewers were similarly inspired to take on scholarship in dealing with false claims, or if we've managed to convince you that it's easier to support RJ in doing the work for us, please go to his site, tortugan.wordpress.com, right now, today, and give him a little support via GoFundMe or Patreon. Once you've done that, if you'd like to subscribe to RJ's YouTube channel or the Paulogia channel, click on the circles on screen or check the description for links to everything that we've talked about today.
Goodbye.
Later.